Good day to you, I'm Ryan, and I'm both a fan of Warhammer, retro games, and horror. But I've been a little bit content starved for a game that covers all three of those. Warhammer 40k video games have a tendency to really play up to the power fantasy of being an 8-foot tall super soldier, with you taking on hordes of all kinds of enemies with absolute ease, shredding your way through the battlefield as an unstoppable force of purging power. Games like Space Marine 2 and Bolt Gun place you in large environments, putting great emphasis on the speed and power of a Space Marine, letting you glide across beautifully made levels that convey a sense of the grandeur of Warhammer 40k. On the other side, strategy games such as Dawn of War 4 often give you a huge overview of the battlefield and the destruction found in full-scale war zones, but few of the games really touch on the horror aspects that some of the settings in Warhammer 40k have, especially the newer games. What if I told you that there was a Warhammer 40k video game released in 1995 that was a great example of how terrifying it can be, even as a Space Marine? Space Hulk: Vengeance of the Blood Angels is a video game adaptation of the Space Hulk board game and somewhat sequel of the original Space Hulk game for MS-DOS and IBM PCs. The premise is thus: a Space Hulk has appeared from the warp and is on a collision course with the human world of Devlar 3. The Blood Angels chapters of Space Marines dispatch their elite, a band of Terminators, into the Hulk, who must navigate the decrepit corridors, battling the ever-hungry and vicious Genestealers within to trigger the Hulk's engines and send it back to the warp. Even though you control a member of the Space Marine elite, the game strips away any semblance of power and speed you have, leaving you to lumber your way through the abandoned halls of the Space Hulk, infested with Genestealers that have claws so sharp even the advanced Terminator plate is ripped apart like tissue paper. But to really understand the game, I need to give you guys a lore dump. In the Warhammer 40k setting, Space Marines are humanity's greatest warriors, though with all the genetic modification and psychological conditioning, they are only barely considered human. Armed with the finest weapons and armour, they wage war against the Imperium's enemies. Among the finest fighters in a Space Marine force are the Terminators. Clad in hulking suits of ceramite mounted on an exoskeleton, these Terminators are deployed when the situation calls for not only the experience of the veterans inside the suit, but also the incredible protective power of the armour. This does come at quite the cost though, as Terminator armour is restrictive and clunky, making moving around quite tough for the Marine inside. Because of this, Terminator armour is typically deployed when fighting in close and claustrophobic environments like the corridors of hive cities or spacefaring vessels and the infamous Space Hulks. But what exactly is a Space Hulk? Essentially, Space Hulks are the debris and empty hulls of all kinds of spacefaring vessels that have been merged together by the reality-bending powers of the warp. These hulks are often massive with their own gravitational field and atmosphere, and as they constantly float through the cosmos with no real direction or purpose, pose a real threat to other vessels and even planets when on a collision course. The true terror of a Space Hulk comes from its twisted, dark and unending hallways lined with failing archaic technologies. With no power or light, these malformed ship graveyards become claustrophobic death traps that have literally been to a demon realm on back, with the psychic echoes of the previous crew often resonating in the liminal halls, and that's not even mentioning the things that can lurk within them. The prime suspect when Space Hulks are involved are the Genestealers, an alien bioform specifically designed by the Tyranid hive mind to infiltrate, infest and overwhelm from within. These creatures are armed with 6 limbs and a durable exoskeleton that's surprisingly well armoured. Their main weapon is a pair of incredibly sharp claws that can slice through the aforementioned Terminator armour with ease, while their second set of arms is equipped with a pair of hands that let them operate devices, open doors and above all, manoeuvre their way through ventilation systems. Typically, these Genestealers are found infesting the mangled halls of Space Hulks, drifting through the vacuums of space until they are discovered by other forces or somehow make landing on a planet. Using the tight corridors to their advantage along with their blistering speed, they prey upon any that enter these drifting graveyards. Phew, that was quite a bit of exposition. Now we can actually move on to the game. Space Hulk: Vengeance of the Blood Angels was released in 1995 by Electronic Arts primarily for the 3DO, but later saw ports for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. It's a tactical first-person action game where you take control of a band of Terminators in a main campaign, and features an assortment of extra missions too, with missions from the original board game and the 1993 Space Hulk video game. The main way to play the game is the campaign, where you initially take control of a single Terminator following the orders of a squad leader, before eventually becoming said leader and controlling the whole squad of up to 10 Terminators yourself. With a variety of mission types and objectives, you need to explore the narrow corridors and rooms of the Space Hulk, battling Genestealers, hybrids and even Chaos Space Marines in later missions. Initially, controlling just one Terminator gives you an easy introduction to the game, the difficulty gradually ramping up and letting you get to grips with the controls until you control a full squad yourself. Thankfully, the game has both a tactical map and a time freeze that lets you order squad members around and get an overview of a level, though the time freeze doesn't last forever, so you do need to use it sparingly. Along with a tactical map, you get a minimap in the bottom corner of the screen, both letting you see your squad members and the enemies that are descending on them. It's quite reassuring seeing a teammate nearby you on the map, but you really feel their absence when the only thing you see are blips of enemies approaching you with no help in sight. Don't go, brother! Save me! The minimap also displays crucial information like the location of doors, potential enemy spawn points, and your current objective. Being part of a squad in the early game actually feels great, as you're tasked with not only important mission objectives, but sometimes just to guard an area while your squad mates go on to take care of objectives themselves. This can lead to some tense situations where you're the only one guarding a crucial choke point against an enemy horde. The area for your Terminator squad mates is serviceable but relatively simple, and they can mostly take care of themselves, however, as they constantly snap into position to fire at incoming enemies, but they do sometimes end up just shooting the wall. And while they can get in the way sometimes when moving around, thankfully you can push them aside to get past, but this can sometimes lead to them being stuck in a bit of a movement loop, especially when there's a lot of Terminators in one room. The squad can have a variety of loadouts, but the most standard is the Stormbolter, a rapid but single shot per button press gun. There are also weapons such as the Heavy Flamer, which is absolutely crucial in some mission types, leading to a game over if the equipped Terminator goes down. This one is a ranged weapon but causes wide areas to burst into flames on contact, taking out enemies and friends alike. For the melee side of things, Terminators are equipped with a Power Fist, and it's used by mashing the shoot button when a Genestealer is in close range, but to be perfectly honest, if a Genestealer gets into melee combat with you, you'll most likely be taken down. Those razor-sharp talons can shred Terminator armor with ease after all. It'd be a bit too easy if you could just take out enemies in melee combat every time. There's also a few other melee weapons that can drastically increase your chances of survival in melee, like the paired lightning claws and the Thunderhammer Storm Shield combo, but the downside to those is you no longer have access to a ranged weapon. Your ranged weapons also have a slight chance to jam, making them temporarily unusable against the encroaching horde of Genestealers. Orders are given through the voice channels of your Terminator suit, with you able to hear each squad member's dialogue as they discover enemies and objectives. The voice acting here is wonderfully cheesy, and rather than a whole slew of unique lines, seems to be pieced together from small audio cues to make complete sentences.
Search this area for archived record. I can't see an archived record.
Despite the voice lines being a bit stilted in their delivery, I feel that it adds to the atmosphere, especially when you hear your squad mates get taken down by Genestealers. When there are only one or two Terminators left, the vox lines are eerily silent compared to the array of chatter that comes from a full squad, which when paired with the desolate environments can really make things unsettling. When in missions, the sound design is quite sparse, with you only hearing the thunder of bolter fire and the roars of distant Genestealers as they get ever closer to their prey. The lack of music in missions especially contributes to the game's empty feeling while exploring the Space Hulk, though you don't really make any noise while moving, which is a shame, as the heavy thudding footsteps of a Terminator echoing across the halls as Genestealers scream all around you would make the game a lot more atmospheric, though I can see the footstep noises getting a little annoying after a while thanks to the near silence of the environments. Another awesome factor for the atmospheric horror of the game are the grainy visuals. The environments consist of wonderfully low-res graphics and 2D sprites in a 3D environment that surprisingly holds up well today. The corridors are tight and foreboding, with endless stretches of halls and rooms that can hide all sorts of creatures within, with a highly limited view range of your Terminator being a great lore-friendly hindrance that does well for the atmosphere and gameplay. Genestealers sprint out of the darkness around you, needing you to rely on your scanner and minimap to react, but thanks to the low movement speed of being in a walking tank, makes actually turning around to face the incoming threat quite a tense experience. Your attention's constantly split between monitoring what's in front of you in your view and what's around you on a minimap scanner, leading to a panic-inducing sense of dread when surrounded on all sides. Despite the 1995 graphics being highly pixelated, they do a great job of conveying the grimy, rotting look expecting of an ancient amalgamation of spaceships, with you using your mind to fill in the gaps that aren't quite made up through the visuals and low draw distance. Speaking of a low draw distance, I think it works to the game's advantage quite well. As Space Hulks typically have no power, you rely on the lights of the Terminator suit to brighten the surroundings. This does wonders for the gameplay, as being able to see any further would take away a lot of the challenge of spotting Genestealers running at you from the darkness. The lack of draw distance really helps sell the claustrophobic vibe you get while walking around the Space Hulk too. The enemy's lack of smooth animation also helps sell their alien vibe, with their unpredictable movement patterns, tendency to dodge out of your firing range and surprisingly fast movement speed, establish that these aren't just your typical alien fodder, but smart and dangerous predators. The game does have a few different enemy types like hybrids and Chaos Space Marines, but Genestealers are the primary enemy type you'll be fighting, which can make the enemy variety feel a bit bland at times though. The clunky controls also make sense in the context of the game, as being in Terminator armor means you're a lot less agile than the typical Space Marine. While the controls can take some getting used to, the methodical movement that sees you commit to just about every step makes correcting mistakes in positioning quite difficult, as once you're in a particular hallway or room, it's tough to get back out of it. When roaming around, this really sees you commit to a particular direction no matter the danger that lies ahead. For the gameplay feeling of being a slow-moving Terminator, this works really well, but also helps sell the fact that being a Space Marine, you know no fear when trudging the unknown halls of the Space Hulk. The game can feel quite difficult at times, especially on the later, less forgiving missions where even the smallest mistake is punished, leading to replaying levels quite frequently the closer to the end of the game you get. I feel the game really rewards patience and tactical thinking, and though initially you want to run through the Space Hulk all guns blazing, you quickly learn that isn't the best way to approach the missions, especially if you want to keep your teammates alive. Generally, the game is fair enough to the player, but missions that rely on one squad member in particular surviving because they're the only ones with a heavy flamer feels a little bit more unfair to small mistakes of positioning and moving your squad around. The primary differences between the different versions of the game are visual clarity and performance. The 3DO version is the definitive version of the game, being the first to release. With the best audio, cleanest visuals, and a great performance speed, this is one of the best ways of playing the game. The Sega Saturn version runs a lot faster than both the PS1 and 3DO versions, but the extra game speed is almost comical. The audio is also the worst out of the three versions, though the visuals are on par with the PS1 version. The PS1 version had the widest reach and is the one most people remember, but is let down by its much longer loading times. In terms of performance and game speed, it's a lot more faithful to the 3DO original. Both the Sega Saturn and PS1 versions also feature different soundtracks to the 3DO version. If you're looking at playing the best version of the game, definitely go for the 3DO version, though the cost, availability and fan support of the PS1 version has a much lower barrier to entry if you want to play it. Although it can feel a bit dated, I think that what can be a detriment for any other game of the era really becomes a strength when establishing both the atmosphere and feeling of being a Terminator in a decrepit Space Hulk, hunted by the ever-hungry Genestealer menace. Subverting the typical power fantasy you'd expect from first-person shooters at the time is also quite a bold move, and having a bunch of level types not only in the campaign but also missions inspired by the tabletop and 1993 game gives you quite a lot of replayability, even if the lack of enemy variety and detail in the environment does make things a little bland. Personally, I'm a big fan of this title and I'd love to see a more faithful remake of this game at some point that captures the same feeling and gameplay elements with both a tactical map and first-person action. Although there have been other Space Hulk games released since this one came out, none of them have been quite the same as this in both atmosphere and gameplay, with them committing completely to the first-person action or the tactical tabletop-like elements. What do you guys think of Space Hulk games, and which one have you played? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and take it easy.